Hey folks, this is Drew Burdick with the Building Great Experiences podcast. With me, I have my dear friends and a former colleague, Jennifer Borchardt. We work together with a former employer. She's an amazing human, amazing leader in all things customer experience, user experience. Excited to have her on the show today. I'm gonna let her introduce herself in a second. But one thing I did want to start with, just tell a quick story. Jennifer and I met each other through mutual friends about, I don't know, three years ago. And when we first sat down and talked, she probably doesn't know this, but like she out the gate just was like so enlightening with her insights into design and especially all things around inclusive design. And that's going to be our topic for today. She's been an invaluable resource and trusted advisor for me. So anyways, without further ado, Jennifer.
You are way too kind, Drew. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here and talking to you. And I hope everyone who listens to this enjoys it as much as I know we're going to enjoy it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, me too. I'm sure people enjoy it. So as I mentioned, our topic for today is inclusive design and inclusive experiences. And for those of you who are listening, may not know what that means. I'm going to let Jennifer kind of describe it, define it. What is it? What does it matter? Why do we even care about this? And then we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about who's doing it well and things like that. So anyways, Jennifer, what do you think inclusive experiences are? What makes it inclusive and why should we care?
Well, inclusive design is, as it sounds, it is an experience that allows a wide range of people to be able to take part in the experiences. A lot of people equate inclusive design with accessibility, and accessibility is very important, particularly accessibility for technology. Many people who worked in experience have heard about many users use screen readers, assistive technology, but I'm actually going to move away from that for right now because there's a part of inclusivity that is not talked about, but it is becoming a more important consideration. When I think of inclusive experiences, and I use experiences and not just design, experiences is bigger. Inclusive experiences also includes people who have language limitations, people who have financial and food insecurity. All of these things are really important and really growing. People who are suddenly thrust into experiences, thrust into situations that they may not have been expected to be thrust into, and creating experiences that would allow those people to still participate in society, make transactions, shop, take care of themselves, take care of their families, basically to be able to get through life and enjoy all of the wonderful things that life has to offer without feeling excluded, especially as so many people are facing job changes, family changes, health changes, especially as they grow older. Thinking about inclusivity in a very, very broad sense is important, not only to experienced practitioners like me and Drew, but to really anyone who is designing experiences, who's influencing experiences, anyone who has any sort of influence over technology, over public policy, over even how to build a house or how to build toys. It's really everything and everywhere. And I hope that wasn't too broad of a response.
No, I think you're spot on. I remember in 2016, I went to a conference and there was a presentation given there that kind of changed opened my eyes to a whole different universe of design and experiences. And it was all about inclusive design. And one of the things that they used as an example was you can design things intentionally to be inclusive, and then you can design things intentionally or unintentionally to be exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And they used an example of cities and how they design spaces. And oftentimes, especially in the last decade, they've designed spaces that are almost like to keep people experiencing homelessness away, right? So they have like park benches that have like
The bars.
yeah,
Yeah.
bars. And then they have like bumps and spikes and stuff that keep people from laying down on concrete areas. And what's really interesting is it was probably end of last year, earlier this year, I did some pro bono work with a organization that specifically serves people experiencing homelessness in the Charlotte area. And it was, really amazing to be part of that conversation because we were helping them think through, like, how do we make the process simpler and easier for people who, they're living out of a suitcase potentially. Maybe they're sleeping in a tent, or, they're in a community. They're trying to figure out how to send mail, how to do their laundry, how to take a shower, how to use the restroom. And we were helping them think through every step of that journey. And it was amazing. Like, not only for the human impact, right? Like, you're helping real people with real problems, but also, the indirect impact, which is where I think a lot of people kind of get stuck, is on, like, well, does inclusive experiences, how does that drive revenue? How does that drive sales? How does that impact the business? And I think that there's a lot of indirect and direct impact. Like, for example, this organization that I mentioned, because we helped them make that experience better, they were then able to go talk to their sponsors, their partners, tell those stories. Those partners could use it to talk about the things that they're doing in the community, and therefore help their business grow. So there's like this whole intersection of doing good things for people and making experiences inclusive isn't just like a feel good thing. It also can create business impact. I don't know if you've thoughts on that, but other ways that people are. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on that. So the solution to homelessness isn't those park benches. But when I was talking before, inclusive experiences includes influencing policy. Imagine all of the effort, all of the resources that went into designing those park benches or those spikes went into creating easier access to public services, or reducing the cost and effort of building supportive housing, or improving education at the early ages. I would say that the most important and the highest impact experiences are not these super sexy, fancy ones. These are the very fundamentals of existence. How do you make a phone call? How do you use the library? How do you make sure you have enough food? How do you make sure you have access to basic medical care? What it takes to know about this is, it's actually so small, but that small amount is so great for people who have never had to think about it, again, who suddenly find themselves in unfamiliar situations. And if we were to invest as a society, as individuals, as people who have a little bit extra time and money to give, just to help with the of living, and then also talking about business, just the basics of being able to do the easy things almost thoughtlessly and seamlessly, being able to deposit a check, being able to access your money, being able to see how much you have in your account, being able to make a purchase without it feeling confusing. So it's these basics, these brilliant basics, as one of my other former employees have said, that really do make the difference. And I think that we have a huge and critical opportunity to think about the very basics of communication, of relations, of technology, as AI emerges and becomes infused in every part of our lives.
Another example that comes to mind is like healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
I was just recently having a conversation with a startup founder. They specialize in like mobile charging. So they basically provide access to charge your phone while you're in a waiting room or in an operating room or whatever. You're basically in a healthcare.
I know that person. I met him at breakfast.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and their organization is amazing. But what's really interesting is that he was talking about, underserved communities are typically the ones that need those resources.
Mm-hmm.
And those underserved communities, if you think of it from a business standpoint, there's a whole segment of people, of customers, that nobody else is really targeting, nobody else is working with, nobody else is supporting and helping. And I think from a business standpoint, like I said, there's the benefit to humanity, benefit to people, right? You're helping people get in touch with their loved ones in a moment of crisis where they need to call someone and their phone is dead or whatever. But then there's also the other side of it, which is you open your door to a whole new segment of people, right? And these are people in their business model. They they sell or they kind of like license their kiosks that
Hmm.
charge batteries to the healthcare provider. And then they collect data and they provide advertising for resources that help that community. Right. And so this is an interesting intersection of like business value and human value. And I think where things are really, when you think about inclusive experiences, the ones that are doing it well are really keeping both of those things in mind, those vertices, and they're
Yeah.
finding like what's in the middle so that, you know, they're doing both.
Rising tide lifts all boats, right? And one of the things that been happening, but really accelerated during COVID and continues to accelerate, even though a lot of people's lives have pretty much gotten back to normal, is the disappearance of the middle class. It hasn't disappeared yet, but it's going to if we don't do something. Good business and doing good for humans is going to become everyone's, for lack of a better word, problem. Because if everyone is fed, if everyone has their basic needs and their basic wants satisfied, that's good for everyone. Cleaner communities, better educated communities, people who are more involved and engaged in their cities and in organizations. This is going to be good for everybody. And I feel like we're losing the plot with this. There are just a few very loud voices who are having outsized influence on where investments are being made. And especially as a lot of people like you and me, for example, are leaving corporate, we're leaving with a lot of really great experience, a lot of really good connections, a lot of good data. Why not use that to help make everyone's life a little bit better? It's additive. And if you make a lot of people's lives a little better, that is a lot better for society and also for people. It doesn't mean you're giving away everything and we're going back to socialism or anything. It's the right thing to do, and the consequences of not doing that are going to be more and more apparent the more we all put this off.
Yeah. You said something which I think is on point. It's like everyone's problem. And I think it's everyone's opportunity too, right? It's kind
Yes.
of like the flip side is there's an opportunity to create more inclusive experiences, provide more inclusive services, make your products more accessible to more people. And not only will it benefit society and humanity as a whole, but it'll also benefit you know, your bottom line, because I think a lot
Yeah.
of people who are listening are in business and I've had conversations with people who have talked about this and there's kind of this like, yeah, I agree. Like in theory and principle, like we should try to do these things, but also I got to figure out how to drive results. And I
Well,
don't know if that's going to help me. You know what I mean?
as designers and experience influencers, we can do a better job of clearly articulating the value and the purpose and the why of all of this in the language of business. How much money is this going to save or generate? How many more customers will be company's brand be seen? So more like how's it going to influence their reputation in a positive way?
Yeah. It's a good segue to our next question, which is I'd love to hear some thoughts and examples of companies that are doing this well for customers, for employees, for the community that they serve.
So I was thinking about this, and one company that immediately comes to mind is Verizon. One type of inclusivity and accessibility, which we don't really talk about a whole lot, is what happens as you get older, what happens as you lose your cognitive facilities, what happens as you get dementia and Alzheimer's, which is people are living longer, and because of environmental factors, we're seeing more and more of this. And for anyone who has ever cared for someone who needs memory care, memory support, that is a devastating and frustrating and just very difficult experience. So what Verizon is doing, Verizon is not the only company doing this, but there's certainly one of the more prominent companies doing this. They are creating smartwatches specifically for Alzheimer's patients. So caregivers, children can give their loved one a watch where they can be tracked. So to make sure that they're where they should be, that they're staying safe, but also making it easier for the caregiver, the family member to communicate with them, but also for that person to communicate with their caregivers and their loved ones. So that's something which I think they may have been one of the larger companies to do this and to actively market it in a broad sense. And I think that's pretty amazing.
That's a really good example.
Yeah.
I think the elder care thread is something interesting. I'll pull on that for a second, because we have a generation of folks who are, 60 plus, that are now entering a season where they have to think about things they didn't have to think about before, and potentially even encountering moments where it's like they're facing, health issues they've never had to deal with before, Alzheimer's, for example. And it's a really good point that inclusive experiences, part of what being inclusive is you're thinking about all those different types of people and what they might be facing and how you can better serve them. And it isn't just I think people at least a lot of folks, when I talk to them about accessibility or inclusivity, they think of like this sort of standard, people
blind.
Right, like hearing disability, vision. They might think about like someone who is maybe an amputee or is something with their, legs or their limbs. And those are important, and those are things to think about. But there's these other, elements of being inclusive, elder care being one, that you have to think about as well. And I think it sometimes gets overlooked. Like I just had a coffee with a friend who's a CMO who works with in healthcare space again. And he was discussing how he used the word like boomer care is kind of surging right now. And this notion of like people who are between 60 to 80 and what's the journey of how you bring them through these different stages of care to, eventually hospice care. And how do you bring all of those different services together so that it's really easy and simple for them versus like, I got to go to this physician for that and this physician for that. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of frame and think about inclusive experiences.
Yeah. And more on elder care, especially memory care. It isn't just the access to or the experience of engaging with healthcare providers or engaging with facilities, but also understanding what it's like for that person to go through that transition from being a fully functional, strong person to someone who is losing a lot of their facilities. How terrifying, how frustrating, not only for them, but also for the people around them. And when thinking about experiences, also thinking about that. I was just in a very small town over the weekend, Columbus, Indiana. It is an architectural landmark for those who haven't been there. But one of the more interesting things that I saw there was in the library. And by the way, the public library is leader in inclusivity. At this particular library, they had a shelf called memory packs. There was all these clear plastic bags that had all these different things in there. One was animals and farm. One was civics. One there were a number of them. And at first glance, it looked like something you would share with a child, but in fact, it was very specifically created to engage with people who need memory care. And one of the things I forgot to mention before when it comes to creating experiences is how do you talk to them? How do you talk to someone who may be experiencing a completely different reality than you are? And how do you navigate that yourself? And how do you help them navigate the situation in a way that feels safe and comfortable? As people age, more and more people are going to have this, but there's also people who have brain injuries because of an accident. Early onset Alzheimer's is actually even more severe than people who get it in their advanced years. This is affecting more and more people. And this again is just one segment of a very, very broad topic of inclusivity. But that I do want to, I'm focusing on this because it's something that not a lot of people think about. And being able to create these types of experiences requires a level of empathy and patience and engagement that you don't need quite as much if you're designing a new app or you're designing a car, for example.
So you said like this is one segment. I think what would be really interesting to hear your perspective on, or what are some of the other maybe like uncommon segments that people don't think about? Like we've already covered, 4 or 5 that are kind of people usually think of, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on, are there others for folks who are listening that they should be like, oh, wow, I never thought of this, this
Yeah.
type of individual.
Well, here's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. How do you make your way in the world if you're suddenly unemployed and it's not your choice and you're probably going to be unemployed for a long time? How do you find healthcare? How do you find health insurance? It's amazing how many benefits corporate gives us. And when I was part of that, I was very grateful for it, even more grateful now. But just the basics, like how do you get benefits? How do you navigate not only applying for unemployment, but how do you get access to social services, to local services? These are things that people do not often think about. They think that they'll never have to think about it. It's never going to be something that they should be concerned with. But all of a sudden, people are unemployed for 6 months, a year, several years, and they need to learn about these things that are actually very, very complicated. Some cities are doing it better than others. Charlotte, I would give a C- to this. I'm helping someone now who's been unemployed for a very long time, coming up on 2 years, and helping them navigate. Here's how you talk to your bank to get into mortgage forbearance. Here's how you register with the food bank, or rather, here's how you get a recommendation for it. Here's all of these free resources that you can take. And that's also part of inclusivity. The experiences are there, but being able to reach those experiences or being able to be part of them is not something that is always very intuitive.
Yeah. You said, so one of the examples I could think of was like temporary disability. So a friend of mine, actually in 2017, I was playing basketball. I got a concussion while I was at work, and concussions are terrible. Side note, I think that science has come out in the last 5 years or so that's proven how bad it is for people. But I had a concussion, and frankly, for probably like 2 years afterwards, I was struggling with vertigo. I was like light sensitivity, a lot of just like unexpected side effects that affected my ability to do my job. It affected my ability to like function, in some cases. And I think a year or so ago, another friend of mine, a former colleague, she had a concussion and she was trying to get her healthcare provider to cover certain costs, and they just like wouldn't do it. And she had to go through this whole series of things, like super painful process.
Yeah.
People didn't care. I think people were almost somewhat dismissive through the process. And I think it's sometimes people think of, the being inclusive or being creating accessible experiences as like for someone who is experiencing something and it's long term. It's this like, permanent or long-term disability or something to that effect. And that's not always true, right? It could be these like, hey, this person is temporarily experiencing this situation. Like to your point, someone might have been laid off and be temporarily unemployed. How do you keep those personas, those types of folks in mind as you're creating these experiences, right? And be aware of, it's not a permanent thing, it's a temporary thing. And probably, potentially, if when they kind of come to the other side of it, right, you're going to have a much stronger relationship with that customer. You're going to have a much more loyal customer who is going to sing your praises to everyone that they know, because they're like, man, when I had this situation, a year or two ago, I was in a bad spot, but this company, this brand did these things to help take care of me. And I'm so much more, likely to keep going back now because I know that it's not just a transaction, right?
Yeah. And it goes the other way too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. What are some of the tactical things, leaders who are saying, okay, I want to create more accessible or inclusive experiences. What do I do? Where do I start? What should I?
Include more people. Be curious. One way that you can start yourself, whether you're a leader or not, is to always seek novel experiences yourself. That is how you get to see how to do things, how people exist outside of your own limited experience, but also actively and intentionally engage people who are different from you. That is really, really great way to make sure that a broad range of experiences and points of view are infused into whatever is going to influence the experience. There are a lot of designers who talk about empathy, yet they completely lack self-awareness and have no idea how to actually put themselves in the shoes of somebody else. But just seeking people who are different than you, or someone who can connect you to somebody else, and get as broad of a range of experiences as you can at the very early stages. Because as you know, it's easier to design something right the first time than to have to redesign it again and again. Engaging other people doesn't necessarily mean you always have to be traveling all over the place. It could be reading a different newspaper, reading a different newsletter, following someone different on LinkedIn or on social media. And eventually you get a better picture, maybe not a complete picture, but a better picture of what questions should you be asking. You may not know exactly what the new experience should be, but you at least, as you're exposed to more people and more situations, you at least have a better sense of what questions to ask. The question asking is really the key driver in creating better experiences, more inclusive experiences.
The core of what you're kind of pointing at is you're not your customer, you're not the user, you're not the people on the other side. And the more that you can put yourself in a position where you're exposed to other folks and other perspectives, other viewpoints, the more likely you'll be self-aware of your own implicit bias, your own assumptions, and then you'll start to be able to challenge those assumptions to say, wait a second, okay, I'm not, just because it's good for me, it doesn't mean it's good for everyone, right? And
Yes.
what are some of the pain points that people are experiencing as they go through this experience that I may not see because I don't have that, I'm not in that situation, I'm not in that context, or I don't have that, history, right? Where it's, think about, this is like a small example, or not small, but it's another side example. It's like people who are experiencing PTSD, right? And like, what are the things that might trigger or spur that in the experience? And if you've never had PTSD, or depression or some sort of a mental health thing, you may not even be really fully aware of what it feels like to be in that situation. And to then, if you're going through, another example, let's say you're staying at a hotel or you're at a hospital and someone says something that's triggering and creates that, it triggers that trauma. And now that person is like upset and you're like, I don't have any idea what's going on here. Right. And like, it's just being more aware of the fact that, everybody has lived different experiences than you. And so don't assume that your lived experiences are the same as your customers. Right.
Yeah. I do like that you brought up depression. To that, I'd like to add anxiety. And going back to the laid off scenario, people get very disconnected from the most basic things. It isn't it, and I wouldn't even thinking about it now. Finding healthcare is important, but even more fundamental than that is, why do I get out of bed in the morning? How do I get out of bed in the morning? So being able to help people continue the very basic atomic parts of experience is something we need to be paying more attention to. And there's a lot more diversity of experience and diversity of people than we, a lot of the things that make people different we can't even see. We don't even get to experience it on a day-to-day basis, which is why knowing what questions to ask and knowing how to engage with different people at different times is really the foundation of creating inclusive experiences.
Yeah. I think of like tactically, people, I would assume, be kind of like, okay, but like, what do I tactically do? And I think some of the tactile stuff that I've seen work well is just get in the habit of talking to customers and talking to employees, and, make it a purposeful, intentional time, whether it's, every month, quarter, couple weeks, whatever time frame or horizon makes sense, but just get in that habit. Like, there's this really great quote in Atomic Habits book by James Clear. And he says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so I think sometimes people will set this lofty goal of like, make our experiences more inclusive, right? But
What does that mean?
you're going to fall to the level of your systems. And if your systems aren't making it a repeated, consistent pattern of, talking to people, inviting people into the journey and the process, understanding their challenges, and it just becomes a goal. That's all it'll ever be. It'll just be this goal of like, we will eventually be inclusive. But if you're purposeful about it, it'll help you see those opportunities more quickly.
Not only purposeful, but incremental. One of the things I think I heard this in business school, every system is perfectly designed to generate the output that it generates. This is, I'm just paraphrasing badly, but doing that systems level thinking and thinking about not only the macro, but also each individual detail as much as you can. That is how you design the better system. It's also how you figure out and identify where are the opportunities to do things better, to be more inclusive. Where are some failure points or potential success points that maybe you can't see at first or even second glance?
Yeah, totally agree. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything else you would like to say about inclusive experiences and how to create them?
Well, inclusive experiences are everyone's job. Everyone can get involved in them, and one way you can help influence inclusive experiences is not just being a designer, being an experienced practitioner, but also making your own voice heard. If you know that you're part of someone who has a point of view that maybe a lot of people don't have, get your voice out there, make yourself known. Your input is very, very important. And I think that this is especially important now as we have these large learning models who are being trained on all this data. The data that it's being trained on is surprisingly narrow. That learning mechanism needs to be broadened quite a bit. But of course, there are some challenges with that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jennifer, fantastic to having this show. Always great to have these conversations with you. I've learned several things just in this conversation. Where can folks find you online?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, so find me on LinkedIn. And I don't have a website for this yet, but it is on LinkedIn. I started consulting firm, Gen AI Consulting, JEN. And this is specifically to provide pro bono work to nonprofits and entrepreneurs. So if you're one of those, find me, you'll see it. And then I'm also the Senior Vice President of Digital Transformation for a boutique consultancy focusing on very, very small businesses called Merevie Consulting. You'll also, they do have a website because I wasn't in charge of that. And I also do reference it on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn for business purposes is the very best place to find me.
And folks, you can find me at drewburdick.com. Also on all social channels, Drew H. Burdick, where I talk about all things related to customer experience, like this discussion around inclusive experiences. We'll be continuing to put out newsletters every week and podcast episodes like this. So stay tuned. All right, Jennifer, appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show. Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you could take a second, hit the subscribe button below. It would really mean the world. I'm trying to make some great content for you every week by interviewing folks and hearing what they have to say about building great experiences. I try to share tips and tricks and things like that. Anyways, take a second, hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.